When I was 24, my parents introduced me to the family as the dropout at every gathering, making jokes at my expense, and it never stopped. I had left college to chase what I thought was my dream, but it felt like the only thing I earned was their constant ridicule. It wasn't the first time they had humiliated me, and it definitely wouldn't be the last. As a child, I had always tried to make them proud, be the perfect daughter, the one who achieved everything they wanted for me. But no matter how hard I worked, my choices never seemed to matter. It was always about what they thought was best for me. "Oh, you should have finished your degree," my father would say every time someone brought up my name. "Well, I didn't," I'd answer, but it always felt like an apology. I thought about dropping out all those years ago as an act of rebellion, but deep down, I was still searching for something. Something that wasn't a degree, something that wasn't their idea of success. But all they saw was failure. At Thanksgiving, when the conversation shifted, I knew what was coming. My mother glanced at me, almost with pity, and before I could even get my first bite of turkey, she said it. "Well, our dropout daughter doesn't like to finish things, does she?" Everyone laughed. It wasn't even funny, but they did it every time, just to make sure I knew where I stood. The harsh laughter echoed through the room, and there I was, sitting at the table, feeling smaller and smaller with each passing joke. I didn't laugh, I didn't smile. I just picked at my food. Uncle Jack always noticed, though. He'd send me these small smiles, the kind that felt like a little escape from the world they put me in. But today, something was different. The evening carried on as usual, the air thick with uncomfortable silences and forced laughter. That was until Uncle Jack's phone rang. He excused himself from the table to answer, stepping out of the dining room. It wasn't unusual for him to take a call, but something about the way he stepped away, his phone held close to his chest, made me wonder. The hum of conversation slowed, and the energy in the room shifted. I could feel it, like electricity in the air. My mind raced. What was going on? Uncle Jack was always the quiet one, the calm one. But as the conversation carried on, I saw him glance back at us. His face was pale, his eyes wide. The atmosphere at the table had completely changed. For the first time, I wasn't the only one uncomfortable. And then, as he ended the call and walked back toward the table, his expression was no longer calm. It was serious. For the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one with secrets. My parents exchanged glances, and for a second, the room went silent. Uncle Jack cleared his throat, and the tension was palpable. Then, he slowly looked at me and said something that made everyone stop dead in their tracks. "Sarah, I think you should know something." I wasn't sure if I was prepared for it, but I was about to hear the one thing that would change everything. As Uncle Jack's words hung in the air, the room grew colder. It wasn't the usual awkward silence that followed every uncomfortable joke made about me. No, this time, it felt different. It was as if the weight of something important had just been dropped in the middle of our dinner table. My heart raced, and my throat went dry. "What is it, Uncle?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. My parents exchanged quick, nervous glances, their eyes darting away from me, almost as if they were avoiding the conversation that was about to unfold. Uncle Jack took a deep breath, his eyes lingering on me before he spoke again. "Sarah, there's something you don't know. Something your parents didn't want you to hear." His words were slow, deliberate, and they cut through the air like a sharp knife. I could feel the blood drain from my face, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. My parents? Hiding something from me? I had always thought of Uncle Jack as the quiet observer, the one who never got involved in family drama. But now, there he was, standing between my parents and me, ready to drop a bombshell. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Uncle Jack glanced at my parents once more, and then, in a tone that seemed to hold years of untold secrets, he said, "Your parents sold the house without telling you, Sarah. They've been planning this for months." The room felt as if it had just been plunged into freezing cold water. My mind raced. Sold the house. The house I grew up in. The house that held every memory of my childhood, every family dinner, every holiday. I looked at my parents, searching their faces for some kind of explanation, but all I saw was guilt. "What are you talking about, Uncle?" I demanded, my voice trembling now. "Why would they do that?" Uncle Jack looked directly at my mother and father, then back at me, his face hardening. "They've been planning to sell it, Sarah. They didn't think you'd ever find out. They've already made the deal." I was stunned. My parents had always been the ones who told me how important family was, how the house was a symbol of everything we had built together. And now, they had sold it behind my back. It didn't make sense. I felt a wave of anger flood through me, but I held it back, trying to process the information. Why would you sell the house? I turned to my parents, my voice cracking. My mother finally spoke, but her words were hollow. We didn't think you'd want it. You've made it clear that you don't want anything to do with this family. Her voice trembled, but I could see the coldness in her eyes. It wasn't just about the house. It was about everything that had led to this moment. You sold it, without telling me. I whispered, my chest tightening. My father, who had always been the strong, silent type, finally looked up at me, but there was no apology in his gaze, only a sense of resignation. It's done, Sarah, he said simply. There's nothing you can do about it now. The words hit me harder than I expected. It was as if all the love I thought we shared, all the years of family gatherings, all the sacrifices I had made for them, it was all meaningless. I had been nothing more than a pawn in their eyes. My mind went numb, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at my parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, the ones who were supposed to have my back, and I realized that everything I had ever believed about them was a lie. Uncle Jack stood there, watching it all unfold, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, Sarah, he said softly, but I barely heard him. I was too lost in the shock of it all. The betrayal, the lies, the cold, calculating way my parents had turned their backs on me. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't just dealing with a family betrayal. I was dealing with the loss of everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. And it was all crashing down around me. As I stood there, the weight of Uncle Jack's words hung in the air like a thick fog. My mind was still reeling from what he had just told me. My parents had sold the house that had been in our family for generations, the house where I had grown up, where every corner held a memory. They had sold it, without telling me, without even considering how I would feel. I felt a cold anger rising inside me, but I didn't speak. I couldn't. The shock of it all was still too much. The table was silent now, the laughter that once filled the room replaced by an oppressive quiet. My mother's face was unreadable, and my father, he looked like he had aged a decade in the span of a few minutes. How could you do this? I finally managed to ask, my voice thick with emotion. My father didn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his plate, his hands tightly gripping the edge of the table. It was time, Sarah, he said quietly. You don't need the house. You never did. His words hit me like a slap to the face. I don't need it. I repeated, my voice shaking. This house, this was my home. It was my life, and you just gave it away. It's not your home anymore, my mother said, her voice distant, almost cold. It's just a house. You're a grown woman now. It's time to move on. The words felt like a dagger to my heart. How had it come to this? How had they become so indifferent to me? I wanted to scream, to shout, to make them understand how much this hurt. But instead, I just sat there, the anger bubbling inside me, and said nothing. Uncle Jack, who had been silently watching the whole scene unfold, finally spoke up again. Sarah, you deserve to know the truth. They've been planning this for a while now. They want you to leave. His words were like a punch to the gut. What? I whispered. They want you gone. They don't want you here anymore, he said, his voice low and steady. My eyes darted back to my parents. My mother's expression hadn't changed, but my father, for the first time, finally looked up. We've been talking about it for months, he said, his voice barely audible. You don't fit in here anymore. You never did. We thought it was best to sell the house and move on. His words were like a cold, bitter truth that I wasn't ready to accept. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so blind? All those years of trying to please them, of hoping for their approval, and now they were telling me I didn't belong. I don't belong. I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I'm your daughter. I've always been here. And you're just going to throw me out. The silence in the room was deafening. Uncle Jack's face was filled with sympathy, but my parents looked like they had already moved on, as if I was just another part of their past they were eager to forget. I stood up from the table, my hands shaking, my heart racing. I can't believe this, I whispered. I can't believe you would do this to me. I turned and walked out of the room, not looking back. I needed to get out of there, to breathe, to think. My world had just come crashing down, and I didn't know what to do next. I went to my car and sat there for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of everything. How could they do this to me? How could they betray me like this? I thought about everything they had said, every word, every glance. And then, I realized something. This wasn't just about the house. This wasn't about material things. This was about how they had always seen me, how they had always treated me. I wasn't their daughter. I was just someone who didn't fit into their perfect picture of what life should be. And now, they were telling me it was time to go. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as the tears started to fall. I wasn't going to let them do this to me. I wasn't going to let them win. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. The house. The betrayal. The cold indifference that I had seen in my parents' eyes. I had always thought of them as my foundation, my support, but now I saw them as strangers, people who had no idea who I really was. I was the daughter who had always tried to do the right thing, tried to be the one they could count on, and yet, here I was, an outsider in my own family. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I had always been the one to clean up the messes they made, the one who kept the peace when things got heated. I had sacrificed so much for them, always putting their needs first, always trying to make them proud. But in the end, it didn't matter. None of it mattered. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw my parents' car parked in front of the house. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at it, my chest tightening with frustration. I couldn't go back inside. I couldn't face them, not now. I needed to think. I needed time. Time to figure out what to do next. Slowly, I got out of the car and walked to the front door. But just as my hand reached for the handle, I stopped. I turned around and looked at the house. The house that had been mine, that had been our family's home for as long as I could remember. And yet, it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a prison. I felt trapped, suffocated by the walls that were supposed to protect me. The walls that had once been filled with love and warmth, now cold and empty. I walked away from the door, down the front steps, and sat on the porch. My mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened, what my next move would be. But more than anything, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss. I had lost my family, and I didn't know if I could ever get it back. I stared at the sky, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world seemed so much bigger than my small, broken family. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. But in that moment, something shifted. I realized that I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval, their love, their acceptance. I didn't need a house to feel whole. I could rebuild. I could start over. The pain was still there, but it no longer consumed me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. It was a quiet strength that came from within, a recognition that I was enough on my own. I stood up, dusted off my jeans, and walked back to the door. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let their choices, their mistakes, control my life anymore. The next morning, the quiet of my house felt suffocating. I hadn't slept much, my mind racing through the events of the past few days. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now there was something else, something more dangerous. It was the realization that I had been living in a fog, letting my parents' actions, their judgments, dictate my worth. I couldn't afford to keep living this way. I couldn't keep letting them control my life, even if it meant losing them. I had spent my entire life trying to prove myself to them, trying to earn their love, but nothing was ever enough. And now, here I was, alone in a house that no longer felt like home, and the weight of that realization hit me harder than anything they had ever said or done. But I wasn't going to break. Not this time. I grabbed my phone, not sure who I was even going to call, but knowing I needed someone to talk to. The screen lit up, and there was a message from Uncle Jack. "I know you're upset, Sarah, but you need to hear me out. Meet me at the park, 2 p.m. It's important." The message felt like a lifeline. I had always trusted Uncle Jack, even when he wasn't directly involved in the chaos of our family. He had always been the one person who saw me for who I was, not as a dropout, not as a failure, but as his niece. I needed to see him. At least, he was one person who wasn't going to treat me like I was invisible. The clock seemed to drag as I waited for the time to pass. When the hour finally came, I got into my car and drove to the park. I didn't know what Uncle Jack had to say, but I had a feeling that it would be the kind of truth that would change everything. As I arrived, I saw him sitting on a bench, his hands folded neatly in his lap. His face was as calm as ever, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. I sat down next to him, the air between us thick with unspoken words. "You wanted to talk?" I asked, my voice a little shakier than I intended. He nodded slowly. "Sarah, I know this is hard, but there's something you need to understand. What happened with your parents, what they did with the house, there's more to it than you know." I leaned in, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Uncle Jack took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Your parents, they didn't just sell the house to move on. It wasn't about that. There's something bigger happening behind the scenes. They've been hiding it from you for a long time. It's all about the money, Sarah. It's always been about the money." I stared at him, trying to process his words. "What are you saying? Are you saying they've been lying to me? About everything?" Uncle Jack nodded gravely. "I'm afraid so. They've been making decisions without you because they think you don't need to know. But you do, Sarah. You have the right to know the truth." I sat there, my mind spinning. My parents had always put on a facade, always told me everything was fine, always acted like they had everything under control. But now, it was clear that they had been hiding something from me all along. "What are they hiding?" I asked, my voice trembling. Uncle Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced around the park, as if making sure no one was listening. Then he turned back to me, his voice low. "Sarah, there's a reason they sold the house. They're in debt. They've been living beyond their means for years, trying to keep up appearances. And now, they're scrambling to cover it all up. They thought if they could get rid of the house, they'd have enough money to fix things, to keep their lives from falling apart." I was silent for a long moment, trying to absorb everything he had just said. The betrayal stung, but it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about everything they had kept from me. The lies, the secrets, the choices they had made that affected my life in ways I didn't even understand. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. "They've been lying to me for years," I finally said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "They never thought I deserved to know." Uncle Jack nodded. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but you're stronger than you think. You don't need them to define you. You never did." His words were like a balm to the wound, but they didn't take away the pain. They just gave me something else, hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. Maybe it was time to stop trying to fix things with them. Maybe it was time to start fixing things for myself. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. I tried to focus on the idea of moving on, of finding my own path, but it was harder than I had imagined. Every step I took forward felt like a step back. I couldn't stop thinking about my parents, about everything they had done, about the lies they had told me. The house was gone. The memories were gone. And now, I was left with the pieces of my life scattered all over the place. I spent days in a fog, walking around in a daze, trying to pick up the pieces. I felt like I was floating in a world where nothing made sense anymore. The anger that had burned inside me began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of sadness, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Maybe it wasn't just the house I had lost. Maybe it was my family. I had always thought we were close, that we understood each other, but now, I wasn't sure. They had made decisions without me, without even considering how it would affect me. They had pushed me aside, and in doing so, they had taken away the very thing that had always been my foundation. My home, my family, everything I had ever known, gone. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep living in their shadow, trying to make them happy, trying to be the person they wanted me to be. It was time to stop pretending, time to stop living for them. I needed to find my own way, to figure out who I really was. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, staring at the walls, I made a decision. It was time to leave. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I packed my things quietly, not wanting to wake anyone. My mind was already made up. The house was a place filled with memories, but those memories were too painful now. I needed to go somewhere new, somewhere I could breathe without the weight of the past hanging over me. The next morning, I left. I didn't say goodbye to my parents. I couldn't. They had made their choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. I drove for hours, not knowing exactly where I was going, just needing to get away. I ended up in a small town, a place I had never been before, with no plan, no destination in mind. But it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I found a small apartment and settled in, not knowing anyone, but it didn't matter. I was starting over, and that was enough. I spent the next few weeks adjusting to my new life, finding a job, meeting new people. Slowly, the weight of the past began to lift. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to call my parents, to tell them how angry I was, how hurt I was, but I didn't. I realized something important. This was my life, and I was the one who had to live it. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need them to tell me I was worth something. I had always been enough. I just needed to believe it myself. The more I settled into my new life, the more I realized how much stronger I had become. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined me. I had learned to let go of the past, to stop holding on to things that no longer served me. And in that process, I had found myself. I wasn't the person my parents wanted me to be. I wasn't the dropout they had always mocked. I was Sarah, and for the first time in my life, I was proud of who I was. The weeks passed slowly, but they were filled with change. My life in this small town felt different from the chaos I had left behind. I woke up every day with a new sense of purpose, but also with the weight of everything that had happened still lingering in the back of my mind. The past was a shadow I couldn't completely outrun, but I was learning to live with it, to accept that it was a part of me, but not the whole of me. One afternoon, as I sat in a small cafe with my coffee in hand, I got a call from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who it was before I even answered. It was my mother. I had not spoken to her since I left. Not a word. I had been avoiding them, not because I hated them, but because I needed space. Space to heal. Sarah? Her voice was tentative, unsure. It's me, Mom. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I know. I couldn't bring myself to say anything else at first. The silence on the other end was heavy, filled with things unsaid. We need to talk. Her words were slow, careful, as if she was walking on eggshells. I hesitated. Did I really want to talk to her? Did I want to go back to the family that had hurt me so deeply? But then, I realized something. This wasn't just about her. It was about me, too. I had spent my whole life trying to make everyone else happy, trying to fit into their expectations. Now, I had a choice. I didn't need their approval, but maybe, just maybe, I needed closure. What do you want to talk about? I asked, trying to sound neutral, but inside I was bracing myself for whatever came next. I'm sorry, Sarah, she said, her voice cracking. I know. We hurt you. I know we made mistakes. But we didn't mean to. We didn't understand, and now we do. Her words hit me like a wave, unexpected and raw. It wasn't an apology I had expected, not one I had ever thought I would hear. For so long, I had imagined this moment, but I never thought it would come like this. I closed my eyes, taking in her words, letting them wash over me. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough to undo the hurt. But it was something. It was a start. I needed you, Mom, I said quietly, my voice softer than I had intended. I needed you to understand me, to see me for who I am, not who you wanted me to be. There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up, but then she spoke again, her voice filled with a sadness I hadn't expected. I know, Sarah, and I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I just wanted to protect you, but in doing that, I pushed you away. And I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. I felt my chest tighten, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Could I forgive her? Could I forgive them both for everything they had done? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing. I wasn't the same person I was when I left. I had grown. I had learned that I was worthy of love and respect, not because of what they thought of me, but because of who I was. I don't know if we can fix everything, I said, my voice steady now. But I'm not giving up on us. Not yet. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. Maybe we can start over, I said, the words surprising even me. Maybe we can try to be a family again, but only if we're honest with each other. No more lies, no more pretending. I can do that, she replied, her voice full of quiet hope. I can do that, Sarah. I ended the call, not knowing what the future held, but feeling a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe. I didn't have to carry all the weight of the past on my shoulders. Maybe I could forgive, but not forget. And maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild the relationship I had once thought was lost forever. The days that followed were quiet, but the silence felt different this time. It wasn't the kind of silence I had grown used to after leaving home. This was the kind of silence that held possibility, that felt like the calm before a storm. My parents had reached out, and for the first time in years, I felt like there might be a chance for something real to come out of all the pain. But it wasn't easy. I had spent so much time in this small town, building a life for myself, learning who I was without the weight of their expectations, that now, facing them again felt like opening an old wound. My phone rang again one evening. It was my mother. The sound of her name on the screen made my heart skip a beat. I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the screen. I wasn't sure if I was ready to pick up, if I was ready to face them again. But I knew deep down that if I didn't, I might regret it. I answered. Sarah? Her voice sounded softer than I remembered. Mom. I responded, not sure what I was expecting, but unsure if I was ready for what would come next. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I know we have a lot to talk about. I just want you to know that I'm trying. I'm really trying, Sarah. The words felt almost foreign coming from her. For so long, I had waited for something like this, but hearing it now, after everything, made me hesitate. I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were, she continued, her voice shaky. I know I hurt you. We hurt you. But I want to be there for you now. I want to do better. Her words weren't enough to erase the years of disappointment, but they were a start. It was the first time in a long time that she had acknowledged the hurt, not just glossed over it. I closed my eyes, trying to collect my thoughts. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you yet, I said slowly, my voice low. But I'm willing to try. I don't want to keep living in this space between us anymore. There was another long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up, but she didn't. I understand, she whispered. But I want you to know that I'm here. Whenever you're ready. It wasn't an apology, but it was more than I had expected. It was a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could start to heal. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a while, letting her words sink in. I wasn't sure what the future held. I wasn't sure if I could ever trust them completely again, but I knew that I couldn't stay angry forever. I had spent so much of my life trying to fight their battles, trying to make them proud, that I had forgotten to live for myself. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe, for the first time, I was going to start living for me. I still had a long way to go, and I didn't know if I would ever feel completely whole again. But I was learning to take things one step at a time. My phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a message from Uncle Jack. I know it's hard, but don't give up. You're stronger than you know. It was simple, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't alone. I had people who cared about me, even if it wasn't always the people I thought would. The road ahead was uncertain, but I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years. The silence that had once been filled with loneliness now felt like a chance for something new, a chance to rebuild what had been broken, not just with my parents, but with myself. It was time to stop being stuck in the past and start moving forward. It had been a few weeks since I had that conversation with my mom. I had been slowly rebuilding my life, piece by piece, but there was still this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't something that happened overnight, but it also wasn't something I had to force. It had to come in its own time. One afternoon, I received a message from Uncle Jack. I know things have been difficult, but I think it's time for you to come home. I paused when I saw those words. Home. The word used to mean something so different to me. It was where my family was, where we had shared so many memories, both good and bad. But now, home felt like a place that had abandoned me, a place where I had been betrayed. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face them again. I wasn't sure if I was ready to step back into that world where everything seemed to fall apart. But Uncle Jack's words lingered in my mind. Maybe it was time. Maybe it was time to stop running away from the past and start confronting it, piece by piece. I needed closure, even if that meant facing the people who had hurt me. So, I made the decision. I called my mom. Mom, I think I'm ready to come home, I said, my voice trembling slightly. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then I heard her soft voice. Sarah, are you sure? We've hurt you, and I don't want you to feel like you have to do this for us. No, Mom. I'm doing this for me. I need to do this. I need to know if we can move forward. The words felt heavy as they left my mouth. Moving forward. I hadn't really thought about what that would look like, but I knew it had to start somewhere. A few days later, I found myself standing at the front door of my childhood home. The house looked the same, but it felt different now. The memories that had once been so warm now felt like a distant echo. I took a deep breath and knocked. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't want to turn back. My mom opened the door, her face filled with emotion. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. I didn't say anything at first. I just stepped inside. She didn't need to apologize again. I had heard her apology. This wasn't about that. This was about what came next. We stood there in silence for a few moments, and then I spoke. "I'm not here to change everything overnight. I'm here to see if we can find a way to move forward." My mom nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "We're willing to try, Sarah. We'll do whatever it takes to make it right." That was all I needed to hear. It wasn't a promise that everything would be perfect, but it was a start. A start to rebuilding, not just the house, but the relationships that had been torn apart. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But for the first time, I felt like I had a say in how things were going to unfold. I didn't have to be the person they wanted me to be. I could be myself, and that was enough. It was a long road ahead, but I was ready to walk it. I was ready to finally stop running and start healing. Maybe, just maybe, I was ready to find a new kind of home, one where I wasn't afraid to be who I was. It had been a few weeks since I walked back into that house, and every day felt like a new beginning. My parents and I didn't know exactly how to fix what had been broken, but we were trying. Slowly, we were learning to be a family again, but this time it wasn't the way it used to be. We couldn't go back to the old ways. Too much had changed. The house was quieter now, the air still thick with the weight of everything that had happened, but it wasn't as heavy as it once was. I wasn't sure what I was expecting when I came back, but I wasn't expecting things to change overnight. I still had my doubts. I wasn't sure if I could ever fully forgive them for what they had done, but I knew that I couldn't keep holding on to the past. One evening, I sat in the living room, staring out the window. It had been a long day, but I felt a sense of calm settle over me. Maybe it was the stillness of the moment, or maybe it was because, for the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. It was a strange feeling, one that I wasn't used to. The phone rang, interrupting the silence, and I saw my mom's name on the screen. I hesitated before picking up. "Sarah," she said, her voice soft. "I've been thinking. We've been so focused on trying to fix things, but we haven't really talked about what you need. What do you need from us?" Her words caught me off guard. I wasn't sure how to answer. What did I need from them? I needed their understanding, their honesty, but more than anything, I needed to feel like I wasn't invisible to them. "I just need you to see me," I said, my voice quiet. "I need you to understand that I've spent my life trying to fit into this family, trying to be the person you wanted me to be. But I can't do that anymore. I need to be myself." There was a long pause before she responded. "I know," she said softly. "We've made a lot of mistakes, and we've made you feel like you weren't enough. But you are enough, Sarah. You always have been." It wasn't the apology I had expected, but it was the one I needed. I didn't need them to fix everything right away. I just needed them to finally understand. The conversation ended, and I sat there, letting her words sink in. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step. A small one, but a step forward. Over the next few days, things started to shift. We talked more, not just about what had happened, but about who we were now. My parents began to listen, really listen, in a way that they never had before. I started to see them in a new light, not as the people who had failed me, but as people who were also trying to make sense of their own mistakes. We weren't perfect. We never would be. But we were learning. Slowly, I began to rebuild my relationship with them, one conversation at a time. It wasn't easy, and I knew it wasn't going to be a quick fix, but it was something. It was progress. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was no longer just trying to survive their expectations. I was learning to live for myself, to find my own path. And maybe, just maybe, this was what it meant to finally be free. The weeks that followed brought a quiet shift, a subtle, yet powerful change. I had been living in this small town for months now, working, meeting new people, slowly rebuilding my life after everything that had happened. My parents and I still had a long way to go, but we were making progress. It wasn't easy, but I was beginning to realize that the real work wasn't about fixing the past. It was about accepting it and learning to live with the choices we had all made. One afternoon, I sat in a park, watching the people around me. It was a peaceful day, the sun shining through the trees, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I had learned that I didn't need to keep chasing approval, that I didn't need to be anyone other than who I was. I had spent so many years trying to meet my parents' expectations, trying to be the daughter they wanted, But now I saw that I didn't have to carry that weight anymore. I could just be Sarah. The phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from my mom. "Are you free tonight? We'd like to have dinner, just the three of us. No expectations, just a meal. Let me know." I stared at the message for a while, unsure of what to do. A part of me was still wary, still unsure of whether I was ready to fully engage with them again. But another part of me, the part that had grown and learned over these months, knew that it was time. Time to take another step forward. Time to see what was on the other side of this journey. I replied, "Sure, I'll be there." That evening, I sat at the dinner table with my parents. The conversation wasn't forced. It wasn't filled with the usual tension or awkwardness that had filled so many of our past meals. Instead, there was something different in the air, a quiet understanding. We talked about simple things at first: work, the weather, what had been happening in our lives. But as the evening went on, the conversation turned deeper. We began talking about the things that had happened, the pain, the mistakes, and the hurt. It wasn't easy, but it felt like a necessary step. My mother looked at me, her eyes full of sincerity. "I know I can't change the past, Sarah," she said, her voice soft. "But I want to be here for you now. I want to support you, no matter what." There was a vulnerability in her voice that I hadn't heard before. It wasn't about excuses or justifications. It was about acknowledging the truth. And that was all I had ever wanted. To be seen. To be heard. My father, who had been quiet up until that point, finally spoke. "I've made mistakes, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I haven't always been the father you needed, and I can't take back the things I've done. But I want to try. I want to do better." For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying all the weight of our broken family. For the first time, I felt like we were on the same page, working through the mess we had created together. It wasn't going to be perfect. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start, and that was enough. As I left their house that evening, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something more powerful. It was the realization that I didn't need to hold on to the anger anymore. I didn't need to be defined by the past. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like I was ready to face it. I was no longer the daughter trying to meet everyone else's expectations. I was Sarah, learning to live for herself, learning to rebuild not just her relationship with her parents, but with herself. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be worth it. The weeks passed, and each one brought more clarity. I had started to settle into this new version of myself, a version that wasn't defined by my past mistakes or by the expectations others had for me. I had grown, and I had learned to forgive, if not completely, then at least enough to heal. My parents and I were still learning how to navigate this new chapter in our relationship, but there was a quiet understanding between us now. We were moving forward, slowly but surely. One afternoon, I received a letter. It wasn't a phone call, it wasn't a text, but a letter, handwritten in my mother's familiar script. I hadn't seen a letter like this in years. The envelope was simple, but the weight of it felt heavy. I opened it carefully, my hands shaking slightly. It was from my mother. "Dear Sarah, I've been thinking a lot lately about how far we've come and how much I've taken for granted. I want you to know that I am so proud of the person you've become, even though I didn't always show it. I wish I had understood sooner, and I'm sorry for the times I failed you. I know the past can never be erased, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, always. No matter what, I will always love you. Love, Mom." I sat there for a long time, holding the letter in my hands. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was honest. It was the kind of apology I hadn't known I needed, but now, I realized it was the one that mattered most. It wasn't about fixing everything in one fell swoop. It was about the willingness to try, to acknowledge the past, and to move forward without pretending the hurt didn't exist. It was a turning point. That night, I sat down at the dinner table with my parents. It felt like a quiet victory, even though there were still so many things unsaid. The conversation was easy, more relaxed than it had ever been. We spoke about ordinary things, what we were planning for the weekend, how work was going, what the weather was like. But there was something unspoken in the air. A sense of peace, maybe. A sense of healing. As the evening wore on, I realized that this was the first time in years I hadn't been filled with anxiety or dread about being with my family. For the first time, I wasn't trying to meet their expectations. I wasn't trying to earn their approval. I had simply accepted that this was who I was, and it was enough. The pain wasn't gone. It would never be completely gone. But it was lighter now. I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. I had my family, and for the first time, I felt like I was truly part of it, not as the person they wanted me to be, but as the person I had become. It was a small victory, but it was mine. I wasn't the same person I was when I left. I wasn't the same person I had been in that house, trying to prove myself. I was stronger now, more whole. And I realized, for the first time, that I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to be me. The weeks turned into months, and as time passed, the distance between my parents and I seemed to lessen. It wasn't instant, and it certainly wasn't easy, but we were making progress. Slowly, we were learning how to be a family again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just about the shared memories or the holidays we once celebrated together. It was about understanding one another, accepting the mistakes, and finding a way to move forward. I still had moments when I doubted everything, when the old wounds flared up, and I questioned whether this new version of our family could last. But those moments became fewer and farther between. The weight of the past still lingered, but I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. I had made peace with the fact that things couldn't go back to the way they were. They had changed, and I had changed. But that didn't mean we couldn't find a new way to be together. One evening, as I sat on the porch, watching the sun set, I reflected on how far I had come. When I had first left home, I had been broken, lost in the rubble of a family that had never really seen me. But now, as I watched the orange hues of the sky, I realized I was no longer that person. I had found myself again. I had learned that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not to my parents, not to anyone else. I was enough, just as I was. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. I stood up and went inside, where I found my parents waiting in the living room. There was a quiet understanding between us, a sense of calm that hadn't been there before. My mother smiled at me, her eyes soft. "Sarah, we've been thinking. We want to make things right, for real this time." I nodded, not sure what to expect. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice hesitant. "We want to move forward, but we also want to make up for the past," my father said, his voice sincere. "We've been talking, and we realize that we've missed out on so much with you. We can't change everything, but we can start now." It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was the first time they had fully acknowledged how much they had hurt me and how much they had taken me for granted. The past could never be erased, but this was the beginning of something new. My mother reached out and took my hand. "We want to be there for you," she said. "We want to be the family you deserve." I could feel the sincerity in her words, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to fight for their love. I could see it now in their eyes. I didn't need to prove myself. I wasn't the person they had once thought I was. I was me, and that was enough. We spent the rest of the evening talking about everything and nothing at all. It was simple, but it was real. It wasn't about fixing everything at once. It was about building something new, something based on honesty, something that was ours. The future was still uncertain, and I wasn't sure what would come next, but in that moment, I felt like I had everything I needed. I had my family, I had myself, and most importantly, I had peace. And that was worth more than anything I had ever fought for. As the months continued to pass, I found myself standing at the crossroads of a new chapter. Life was no longer defined by the pain of the past, nor by the expectations that had weighed me down for so long. I had finally found peace, but I knew that peace wasn't something that just appeared overnight. It was something I had earned. The relationships I had with my parents were no longer based on trying to meet each other's needs. Instead, we were learning to simply exist in the same space, acknowledging that we had all made mistakes, but still willing to try again. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One afternoon, as I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't anxious about the future. I had come to accept that my life was my own to shape, and no one could take that away from me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking my thoughts. It was a message from my mom. "Dinner tomorrow? Just us. No drama, just a meal." It felt like an invitation to something simple, yet profound. I thought about the dinner we had months ago, the awkward silence, the unspoken tension. And now, it felt like we were moving beyond that. I replied, "I'll be there." The next evening, as I walked into the house, I felt a wave of nostalgia hit me. The smell of my mom's cooking filled the air, and for the first time, it didn't trigger a sense of loss. It felt like home again. As I sat down at the table, I noticed how calm everything felt. There was no tension, no discomfort, just a quiet understanding between all of us. The conversation was easy, almost like we were finally able to breathe. "How's work?" my mom asked, her voice warm. "It's good. Busy, but I'm enjoying it," I replied. "And you?" I looked at her, genuinely curious. "You know, same as always," she said with a smile. "But I've been thinking about taking up gardening. It might be good for me." Her words caught me off guard, but in a good way. My mom, the woman who had always been so focused on controlling everything, was talking about something as simple and grounding as gardening. It felt like a small step, but in that moment, it felt like a big one. It was proof that things were changing, that we were changing. After dinner, we sat around for a while, talking about everything and nothing at all. It wasn't deep, but it didn't need to be. We were finally able to talk without pretending, without the walls we had built around each other for so long. When it was time for me to leave, my mom walked me to the door. "I'm really proud of you, Sarah," she said, her voice soft. "I know I haven't said it enough, but I am." I didn't know what to say at first. "Thanks, Mom," was all I could manage, but it was enough. It was the first time I felt like she truly saw me, and that was enough to make everything worth it. As I walked back to my car, I realized something. I wasn't just rebuilding my relationship with my parents. I was rebuilding myself. I wasn't the same person who had walked away months ago, broken and unsure. I was stronger now, more sure of who I was. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally start living life on my terms. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks began to feel like months, each one more peaceful than the last. I had learned to embrace the quiet, to enjoy the stillness that had once felt so foreign to me. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and for the first time, I wasn't living for anyone else. I wasn't trying to meet anyone's expectations. I was finally just being Sarah, and that was enough. My parents and I were still rebuilding, still finding our way. It wasn't always easy. There were times when old habits crept back in, when the past felt like it was trying to resurface. But we didn't give in to it. We kept moving forward, step by step. One evening, as I was out for a walk, I received another message from my mother. "I know we've been through a lot, but I just wanted to say I love you, Sarah. I'm proud of who you've become." I stood there for a moment, reading the message over and over again. Her words didn't feel like the same words from the past. They felt real, sincere. It wasn't just about saying the right thing. It was about meaning it. I smiled as I put my phone back in my pocket. It was a small thing, but it meant the world to me. The next week, we had dinner together again. This time, it was just the three of us. No one else, no distractions, just us. The conversation was easy, flowing naturally, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of calm as we sat there together. My dad even cracked a joke, something I hadn't heard him do in a long time. It was simple, but it was real. And for the first time, I felt like I was home again, not because of the house, not because of the memories, but because we were together, genuinely connected. After dinner, my mom hugged me, holding on a little longer than usual. "I'm really proud of you, Sarah. I know we can't change the past, but I'm glad we're here now." "Me too, Mom," I said, my voice soft. "I think we're finally starting to figure this out. It wasn't perfect. I knew that. But I was learning to accept the imperfections, to let go of the idea that everything had to be perfect in order to be good. We weren't a perfect family, and we would never be. But that didn't matter anymore. We were a family, and we were moving forward, together." As I drove home that night, I realized something. I wasn't carrying the weight of the past with me anymore. It wasn't that I had forgotten or forgiven everything. It was that I had learned to let go, to stop letting the past control my future. I had learned to build a life on my own terms, without the constant fear of disappointing anyone. I was proud of the person I had become, and I was proud of the steps I had taken to get here. The road ahead was still unknown, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had found my place in the world, and for the first time, I was truly at peace with who I was.